The Tale of the Astral Tortoise, the foremost epic of our age. Gather round, ye folk of young, and ye of rigor mortis. There is a tale that need be sung, 'tis the tale of the Astral Tortoise. Now lift your leaden eyes up, and see what you can see. For there be one beast that stands above all, and among the stars he be. Some say he be of star stuff, some say he be of sky. I say he be a simple beast, but I cannot know, can I? He graces the skies with a rainbow tail, he glows with a magical glow. He braves the dangers of the ethereal gale, and rarely stops to say hello. They say that he came from the Lulu Lagoon, right next to the old NASA base. But due to a mishap involving baboons, the tortoise was launched into space. He clung to the hull, and he thought to himself, "A rocket ship's no place for me. But there be no great way that the universe ought, so I'll simply enjoy what I see." The rocket named Meatloaf soared high through the air, empowered by the fiery gale. The tortoise averted his eyes from the glare as he clung by the tip of his tail. The tortoise thought to leave Earth or to stay, a dilemma by which he was vexed. The pressure grew that a decision must be made as he reached his trajectory's apex. If I am to leave the Earth, I will need some kind of rocket, as is common astronautical practice. I have one here, but no means of control, thus no way to raise my apoapsis. To return to Earth, I'd need a parachute to wield, but sadly, there be none around. Even if my shell was an effective heat shield, I would simply plummet to the ground. The tortoise resolved to leave the Earth, building a ship out of space junk. A ship of durable metals, with switches and pedals and a CD player in the trunk. As soon as his ship was fully constructed, the Astral Tortoise floored it. Burning rocket fuel from the ship Meatloaf, the tortoise left low Earth orbit. Hark! A minuscule tap on the window. The tortoise thought this peculiar. But no window tap could distract the tortoise, no matter how minusculiar. The tortoise cruised among the stars. He passed by many planets and suns. Truly his ship was not like puny cars. It had front-mounted laser guns. These lasers shot smaller guns, which themselves fired burning lightsabers, which were massive, weighing many tons, that spiraled past our stellar neighbors. Hitherto, it was unheard of in the universe. A tortoise firing projectiles. Thus the Astral Tortoise became an inspiration to all interstellar reptiles. The tortoise met the dread pirate Bartholomew on his massive stellar star cruiser. The pirate himself was a great cockatoo. He was known as a substance abuser. Light flashed as lightsabers flew, setting everything ablaze. The tortoise used his reptilian kung fu, and the pirate was lost in a haze. The tortoise rejoiced, his enemy defeated, and all his friends gave wassail. They picked through the wreckage before they retreated, and found a map on the skin of a killer star whale. The map seemed to lead to Bartholomew's treasure, buried beneath a hidden moon castle. He needed companions who weren't at their leisure. He headed for the great tree, Yggdrasil. The tortoise turned his ship towards the great world route, and with scarcely a quip he was off, playing the nose flute. The tortoise remembered where he had acquired that musical device. He had been in the North Sea, cutting a path through the ice. He was a crewman on the old ship, the Erebus, searching for the northernmost pole. Captain Franklin had, you see, a thesis, that he would find up there a hole. Franklin's father had always said that the earth is hollow on the inside, and even though he was long dead, Franklin thought this was bona fide. Franklin told the crew he didn't agree, and he did not believe that drivel. And although the crew bought it in the North Sea, the tortoise knew the truth. He was just civil. Captain Sir John Franklin, you see, had an ancient nose flute. When he played, the crew laughed with glee. He kept it in a bag made from jute. As they sailed farther north, the crew grew closer to mutiny, and the tortoise looked wistfully north as the captain fell under scrutiny. On one cold and horribly windy morning, worthy of anyone's dislike, The tortoise awoke without warning to see Franklin's head on a pike. He rose and seized the jute sack that contained the captain's nose flute. The tortoise fled south before the attack that would inevitably follow his route. The tortoise was lost in memory, thinking of his previous adventure as he cruised along his trajectory, without fear of piratical censure. As the tortoise approached the great tree, he hailed the dock's keeper's computer. But the keeper was drunk to an astonishing degree, and the machine may as well have been a lump of pewter. Showing astonishing reptilian finesse, the tortoise landed the ship on the pad. His confounding skill seemed to fluoresce as up walked a Viking named Chad. "Welcome to the world route, Yggdrasil," quoth Chad, the world-renowned Viking. He pointed towards a distant castle, and together they began hiking. As they walked, Chad spoke. "That castle there is Hal Valhalla. Those who died in battle are the folk who feast there, having a gala. Together they wait for Ragnarok there, when Odin will lead them out to fight the final battle, where they will defend the final redoubt." They walked up a stone ramp in through Valhalla's door. There was the god Odin, Asgard's champ. The tortoise knelt and asked that god of lore, "I need a companion to help me claim this lunar treasure. I ask you to give only the best fighters by any measure." To which replied our mighty man, "My friend, you need say no more. By any means by which you can, become a tortoise of lore." And from the sky descended fast Teddy Roosevelt, a hero strong, and with him came a thing of the past, Buzz Aldrin, who in space is never wrong. These four friends from Asgard left, out to find their golden dream. With Odin's blessing and abilities deft, they flew like a shining light beam. But from the tree they left behind shouted Odin, unheard as mute, "My tortoise friend, your forgetful mind has abandoned your precious nose flute." Alas, our hero had gone too far in search of Bartholomew's riches. Buzz drove the ship like his olden space cars, and Teddy, for a flight, had the itches. Clad in shining plate, Teddy donned his hat, with great horns curving down. Aldrin picked up his baseball bat, and the tortoise grabbed his sword with a frown. With grinning visages, the heroes told of how they had gotten their names. Teddy came forward and spoke of the bears that were covered in flames. From the shadows emerged some grizzly bears, all five ablaze with cold fire. Emitting an Aurorian light from their hairs, the bears roared and let loose their ire. With stony face and resolute brow, Roosevelt drew his claymore. With one fell swipe, he sliced off a head, then he spun, cutting down the remaining four. He took their pelts and wove, making a cloak that looked quite fair. He donned his work, he took up his sword, and that's how he became known as Teddy Bear. Buzz Aldrin, too, was named for a reason. Once when Neil was down on the surface, and Aldrin was in the command module for nearly a season, the invasion of cyberbees didn't even make him nervous. Though their demonic droning drives men mad, Aldrin picked up his bat and he braced, and as the buzzing filled his ears, those bees were demolished post-haste. Armstrong returned with a cry of alarm. The wreckage of bees still seemed to buzz, but they were all dead. Aldrin unharmed, Buzz Aldrin became the name that he was. The tortoise told them about how he had defeated the dread pirate, that they had a quest now, to go to the moon lair, now quiet. They landed their ship on the moon, outside that dread lunar cove. The tortoise, of course, led the platoon, being inclined to rove. With weapons drawn, they approached the huge gates of the cold castle. With a snake-like roundhouse kick, the tortoise knocked down the gates without a hassle. Though the spacious courtyard seemed empty, 30 ninjas with chainsaws for feet dropped down, surrounding the heroes with ninjas aplenty. They prepared to cut them to meat. There was a terrible roar as the chainsaws started, and a yell from the heroes brandishing weapons. This was no place for the faint-hearted, but those heroes weren't, I reckons. Luckily for all four of them, Buzz Aldrin had a secret to be showed. Get out your nose flute if those ninjas you wish to condemn. At its sound, chainsaw ninjas explode. The tortoise thought of the flute and smirked, for he knew he had already won. But when he reached for his nose flute, he found that he suddenly had none. Get back to the ship, or be destroyed, said the tortoise to Chad, Buzz, and Teddy. The tortoise prepared to return to the void, once all his company was ready. As they got to the ship, they did not go unfollowed, and as soon as they were all inside, all nearby ninjas were immediately swallowed by the combustion of nitrogen tetroxide. The tortoise decided to return to Asgard. In this decision, he was resolute. He hoped that it would not be too hard to retrieve his abandoned nose flute. After a long journey through interstellar space, they arrived at Valhalla's doors. As they entered, they saw many a face who had died in various wars. The tortoise told Odin that he needed the flute. Without it, he almost had to surrender. For going nose fluteless to find Bartholomew's loot is akin to stepping into a blender. Odin returned the flute to the four, and much hope it did render. And so they all set off once more to claim the lunar splendor. A moment of deep retrospection fell upon the group as they soared to the moon. The tortoise couldn't help but think of his pond and his home at Old Lulu Lagoon. Ninjas with chainsaws, pirates and yachts, this truly is no place for me. But there be no great way that the universe ought, so I'll simply enjoy what I see. Together they boarded their majestic craft. As they flew, the tortoise felt tinges, as he flew toward the moon and laughed, landing on a heap of melted ninjas. What? Yelled the crew in awe and shock as their voices raised their pitches. Was there someone who beat us to our brand new stock of unending gold and riches? They looked upon a massive spaceship, all clad in plates of gray. They quickly descended with quivering lip, and they saw a form blocking their way. "'Tis you," bellowed Chad as he pulled out his plate. "But I thought you were dead." And as the form turned, they met the quite late Bartholomew, missing his head. "Yes, it is me," replied the pirate. "Bartholomew have no need of a head, and I dare say that ye have made me irate. Perhaps ye'd be better off dead. I sailed the dread space seas, feeding on interstellar plankton. But as you met terrible cyber bees, I met the resurrected clone of Ben Franklin." That foul clone marched forth among lunar flowers announcing, "I brought he Bartholomew back from the dead with my vampire powers. I will make your blood into a delicious brew." Aldrin came forward and drew his bat, which was encased in a silver shell. A vampire had destroyed his homeworld, that foul rat. He was always prepared to send him back to hell. That foul beast cackled with mirth, pulling out his necromancer syringes. He approached the heap, giving foul rebirth to all of the burned and dead ninjas. They all rose up as one large mass, and were a bit unwieldy. But worst of all, they did not have their former natural frequency. Without the flute correctly tuned, and no air for that matter, what sound is made could not be used to make the ninjas shatter. The tortoise blew through his nose, making air through sheer force of will. He realized he had testudinate powers. Slowly but surely, he made a sound quite shrill. "No," cried the pirate lord. "How in the world is this possible? A being making sound in space? That's far too big of an obstacle." And as the tortoise blew his flute, the ninjas vibrated in sequence. Teddy guffawed, giving a hoot as the tortoise reached their resonant frequency. And with a small sound, the ninjas exploded. With ninja bits abound, the ground was all coated. All who were left were the vampire and Bartholomew, just standing there. He didn't even bother inquire, impressed at the tortoise's flair. Aldrin charged forth, holding his club where he knocked out the clone, Benjamin. He ne'er stood a chance, that pale undead scrub, nearly shattering that poor boy's skeleton. And as for Bartholomew, the dread pirate king, nervous, he glanced about quickly. His rusty black heart stopped then with a bing, for his swashbuckling body was sickly. He simply stood in a painful cower, astonished by the tortoise's magnificence, shocked and awed by Tester's innate power, and greatly impressed by grandiloquence. As they gazed at the headless corpse suppressing indigestion, Buzz Aldrin waved to indicate the presence of a question. "A good death for that plunderer. We really kicked his ass. But I can't help but wonder, how did this come to pass? I do not understand how you made sound in outer space. How can you spew such potent oscillations from your face?" While the tortoise prepared to recount, Chad and Teddy struck up a chorus of how the sonic powers of a legendary fount were granted to the Astral Tortoise. The fount of knowledge was guarded by 3 huge purple mandrills, and all the visitors were bombarded with rocks till they ran for the hills. The fountain was hidden in woods on the planet of Flandakor, where all the citizens wear hoods, told of in ancient lore. The tortoise journeyed far and wide, looking for the legendary waters. He and his pack mule could not be denied the mythical fountain's quarters. Eventually, he found that pool, guarded by 3 killer apes. He dismounted from his mule. He was finally done with this traipse. The great purple beasts started to growl, so our hero told them a joke. A smile graced their bestial jowl, and the tortoise removed his cloak. He told them how he had come, and that he wanted to drink. The guardians thought he was a chum, and filled him a glass with a clink. The tortoise slurped that liquid, and was beset by a flash of light. Suddenly he was lifted to a great and magnanimous height. The tortoise traveled back in time to the days of ancient Rome. He lay in the arena without so much as a rhyme. He knew that this was not his home. A gladiator came out to fight him, a fat man with trident and net, who was bested on a whim. He was knocked down, covered in sweat. The tortoise flicked off the gladiator's mask with a startling gasp of surprise. "Ben Franklin, can this be?" he asked. "It surely must be a disguise." The founding father replied, "It's no disguise. They captured the original me, to be cloned until he dies. He came back in time, Roman slaves to free." The tortoise thought, deciding that this simply should not be. "I should not stay here in the past and alter history. I cannot shake the overwhelming thought that this is no place for me, but there be no great way that the universe ought, so I'll simply enjoy what I see." The tortoise inquired of old Benny Frank, "How did you come to be here in Rome? You come in much further on the great time plank. Why did you make Italy home?" "After I helped the American land, and with electricity I obviously mean, I used the knowledge which I then had at hand to build a fancy time machine." And old Ben Frank, with a gleam in his eye, explained how he then stayed in Rome. "Although there were many places to try, I crashed through the Pantheon dome." "Ben Franklin," cried the tortoise thence, "what purpose have you here? You come here by to Rome, and hence your reasons are unclear." "As I've said, there were slaves to free, which is why I came here at all. Due to my crash, my machine of glee was broken and always would stall. I needed to learn how to breathe out in space, to go fetch supplies for my time machine, and so I've remained in this scholarly place, and therefore make my breathing serene. But by the Romans I was captured for my time-traveling wizardry. They cloned me for my smarts, and thus a clone is what you see. For defeating me in battle on these bloody sands, I give my last death rattle into your victorious hands." and the clone of Ben Franklin, with blood all around, gave our hero a tube before dying on the ground. This tube was a vial of infinite air. The tortoise, amazed, stared at Ben's goal. In his curiosity, which was certainly fair, he licked it and mistakenly swallowed it whole. Buzz chimed in unexpectedly. "I hate to interrupt, but in this case I do believe you made all of that up." "While technically I did," replied the tortoise with conviction. "What is more entertaining than well-written science fiction? If you must know the truth of my confounding exhalation, I'll tell you that it's an environmental adaptation. A small lagoon was where I lived and frolicked hitherto, and though it was a lovely place, there wasn't much to do. My lagoon was somewhat deep, so I could dive some distance, but when I'd come back for air, the water'd have resistance. Such effort was required to swim, but I desired to dive, so I tried something on a whim, and I remained alive. I'd stop my breathing for a while, 1 minute first, I reckoned, and every hour I'd make the time extended by a second. So thanks to breathing exercise, my lungs are in their prime. Thus I can keep air pressurized for large amounts of time. Some claim this be unnatural, and I should dwell on land. I follow not their expectations, routinized command." "Wait!" cried Ben Franklin, the resurrected vampire clone. "This is extremely rankling, for that happened to me alone." "What?" replied the Buzz, filled with anger and frugality. The tortoise said, "Ah, it simply 'twas a kind of alternate reality." With a question Buzz still was prying, of that terrible vampire dread. "How did you get back from dying? You should be long since dead." "Well," said the undead founding father, "that is a story even yet longer. Right now, it would be a bother. I'll tell it when I'm stronger." "If that is so," said Teddy, "then here we'll leave you tied, and here you'll stay, totally stead, until the day you wish you died." "Fine," said the electrical originator. "Just listen and I'll tell the tale of the massive space elevator and its scourge, the killer star whale. Long ago, on planet Earth, there was a place called America. Of huge elevators it had a dearth, which caused a certain hysteria. After returning from the time of Rome to that my home, the 18th century, I was told to build from loam this stellar penitentiary. As I'm sure you can see is blatantly obvious, a space tower made from dirt, due partially to Washington's cockiness, stands up no better than a yurt. Nevertheless, I tried to build it, using my knowledge of science, when a star whale flew up in a fit and destroyed it in utter defiance. I drew my pistol and prepared to duel, challenging that evil cetacean. You probably take me for a fool, for that fight had a short duration. I was struck down, falling to earth. My corpse made a crater in Boston. No situation lacked more mirth. They even felt the shockwave in Austin. As I gingerly touched my broken spine, I looked up at the sky full of stars, and I spotted it, a space whale most clandestine, and he chuckled. Arr, 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 arr. Luckily, I was saved from my dark-looking fate by that friendly space pirate. From his skyship he shouted, "Oi, matey!" The whale was not hardly quiet. Water from the whale blew as the pirate cannons fired, a mournful cry of "No!" as the whale was painfully retired. Sadly, I died before the pirate got to me, so he used his dark piratey magic. I was now a vampire bourgeoisie. It was cosmically quite tragic. From its perch in deep dark space, a whale of epic proportions, the same one indeed that had been shot in the face, descended with shocking contortions. "Roar!" screamed the whale in fury and hate. Recognizing his once-escaped prey, even a space feast could not satiate his desire for a large bloody fray. The company scattered in bone-gripping fear, and the tortoise produced his nose flute. But Teddy, Buzz, and the other friends near just stood agape and quite mute. The tortoise said, "Friends, we have little time for gawking and standing so still. We surely must battle this ugly space slime, or I fear all of us he shall kill." The tortoise quickly rushed to the whale and stared with deep-set defiance. But the tortoise was smacked with the ugly beast's tail in a way that so hard defied science. The tortoise was launched into infinity as the stars streaked past at top speeds, and unaware, he neared the vicinity of a nebula which his flight would impede. As he spun through space, to himself he thought, "Oh, how my Lulu was bliss! But there be no great way that the universe ought, so I'll simply enjoy... What's this?" The tortoise looked back at his rigid green shell and watched it careen to and fro, and to his surprise, though he couldn't quite tell, it glowed with a magical glow. "Now this is something I've never seen, and worthy of contemplation. Maybe my shell, no longer green, reacted to some radiation. I remember something my old teacher said about grappling with the vast unexpected." The tortoise thought of his old mentor Yed, and for a moment floated and reflected. Yed was the noblest of freshwater fish, and a scholar for all of his days. And, as a friend, I certainly wish I had more of his thoughts to appraise. He used to say, "Young tortoise now, your mind is certainly in place, but your technique is akin to that of a cow, and frankly, you're a sodding disgrace." But despite the harsh words of my old wise teacher, his lessons were filled with great vim. And Yed, the fish, turned me into a creature with an astonishing capacity to swim. Suddenly the tortoise recalled his lessons, and he exclaimed, "Yeti!" He angled his body and his head, quite bald, and he soon began to steady. And spiraling through the milkiest way, the tortoise was utterly spent. Perhaps among the stars is the place I should stay, to avoid going where I have went. The tortoise awoke from depth and thought, and saw a perplexing sight. The clouds of dust around him were hot, and glowing unusually bright. I can't suppress my curiosity of how I've come so far, and how I have a luminosity more than the brightest star. I must have floated to the core of some star being formed. The process of formation has myself with light adorned. And that is the end of the tale of the Astral Tortoise.